Vladimir Padrino, according to the confidential information we've obtained, has been admitted to the same military hospital where Hugo Chavez was admitted. He could leave Venezuela to go to Spain and recover or improve his health condition.
Raúl Castro has a double. Everybody knows that, it's obvious. It's even said that the double is better prepared than the original. I mean, the double could actually be even more prepared for political maneuvers than the original. I suppose that President Trump, knowing how much importance he places on history, that we shouldn't underestimate the historical wisdom that Trump has. Since the Kennedys, he was very close to the Kennedys. He would love to talk more with a key figure from that era than with any other fool. And that remaining protagonist is Raúl Castro.
Where you see the true face of the far left, which is made up of xenophobic people, people who are classist, because they've also called us poor fascists. Many recently migrated or recently exiled Venezuelans have had to work in construction, or many have done delivery jobs. And of course, we're not ashamed to admit it. We would be ashamed to be a communist who whitewashes dictatorships like Antonio Maestre or like Mrs. Valverde, a Podemos congresswoman who called us parasites. I am sure that justice, just as it caught up with Nicolas Maduro in different countries, will soon begin to catch up with his accomplices as well.
I'm very ashamed of King Felipe VI. Detained. That's the same as saying that the guys who are being hanged today in Iran, hanging them, executing them by hanging, it's like saying they just put a collar around their necks. They are being hanged and they are not detained, they are kidnapped. Many of them without any judicial process, without any legal guarantees, without seeing their families for 2 or 3 years. They are not detained, sir. They are not detained. Kidnapped by the dictatorship. They are victims of the dictatorship.
Castillon Confidencial by Albert Castillon. Welcome, confidentials. Thank you for your support and your affection. Thank you for being there and for being part of this family that defends freedom of the press and individual freedom. Here, zero fanaticism, only the bare minimum of ideology, entrepreneurship, effort, work, and the will to be free. We defend nothing else. Look, in a few minutes, a guest will tell us how the negotiations between Donald Trump and the Castro government in Havana are going. Yes, there are negotiations, and Donald Trump has sent someone to Havana to negotiate. We'll share the details with our first guest. But first, a rumor. Vladimir Padrino, Minister of Defense for the Venezuelan Chavista military, might leave Venezuela to go to Spain and recover or improve his health condition. This rumor has spread like wildfire, and we've made several inquiries, calls to experts, especially from the United States, federal officials close to the White House administration. And what we found out is that the difficult part for Padrino wouldn't be entering Spain, but leaving Venezuela. Just like Diosdado Cabello, Delcy, and all the others, their whereabouts are tracked at all times. He could only leave through the border with Brazil or Colombia, and it would be really difficult for him. Even more so because of his health condition. According to this information, yes, he is in serious condition and has cancer in a very advanced stage. And there's something else that surprised me. Vladimir Padrino, according to the confidential information we've had access to, has been admitted to the same military hospital where Hugo Chavez was admitted. Do you remember when Hugo Chavez got sick, had cancer, traveled to Cuba, and was hospitalized in Cuba? And every time he returned to Venezuela, he went to this hospital that our friends on YouTube can see, the Carlos Arbelo. Well, Vladimir Padrino, gentlemen, has been admitted to the same hospital, and not only that, he has been admitted, according to our information, to the same room where Hugo Chavez was. Here you see Hugo Chavez with his family walking through the hallways. Vladimir Padrino was also there being treated for that cancer, which according to our information is in an advanced stage. But we've said that the difficult part is for him to leave Venezuela. They won't make it easy for him, but he could enter Spain. Look, Vladimir Padrino is being sought by the Central Intelligence Agency, by the DEA. They are offering up to $15 million for information about him or his capture. And he is accused of all sorts of things as a narco-terrorist. He is accused of torture, kidnappings, summary executions without a court order, and crimes against humanity. Therefore, it wouldn't be so easy for him to enter Spain unless he does so illegally to be treated for that illness. There is an arrest warrant for Vladimir Padrino from the Central Intelligence Agency and the DEA, and they are offering $15 million. For any information, he is accused of narco-terrorism, crimes against humanity, torture, summary executions without trial, and kidnappings. He has committed all these crimes. Therefore, the European Union bars him from entering, and so do the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. He doesn't have it easy. If in the end Rodriguez Zapatero, pulling strings, allows Vladimir Padrino to enter Spain illegally, we will find out. And the United States won't like it at all. We know they're on top of it, but the thing is, Zapatero has already brought a lot of torturers, a lot of criminals here. Look, the first of them, Rodriguez Torres, the torturer and former Chavista general, is working in Madrid as an advisor to Zapatero, and I'm told he's silencing the exiles who arrive in Spain. Or the former Chavista prosecutor, Luisa Ortega. This woman who approved the imprisonment of hundreds of opposition members and looked the other way when they were tortured. Now she sells herself as a consultant in Madrid. You're looking at her website. She just opened the consulting firm Solir a few months ago. Very curious because on this first page it says, I know how to help you. Yes, to get you into prison maybe because anything else. The group of Chavista torturers backed by Zapatero in getting to Spain is immense. There are many more. And now we only have two left. The United States already considers Vladimir Padrino, due to health issues, finished. They no longer see him as a threat. And the others, as you know, follow Donald Trump's orders. Therefore, there are two left to take down and capture: Diosdado Cabello and Granco Arteaga. Now, about Granco Arteaga, mind you, he is Maduro's butcher, the killer, the top torturer of the regime. He was capable of going to Chile to kill Lieutenant Ojeda not many months ago. And this man, who is also banned from entering Spain, walked around Galicia this summer. This program reported it. Yes, Maduro's butcher decided to make the trip of his life, the Camino de Santiago. Maybe looking for God's forgiveness, which he won't find in the years and eternity of hell that await him when he dies. It was as obscene to see him in Spain as it was to see him show his Compostela on social media. The Compostela is the stamp they put on that official certificate to show that you've completed part of the way of St. James. There you see him now. He has already closed his social media accounts after Maduro was arrested. Where is Granco Arteaga? Where is Diosdado Cabello? I'm telling you, the US authorities have them permanently tracked. And Vladimir Padrino too, if he thinks about fleeing and entering Spain illegally. We will keep you informed. We have to keep an eye on any of them. They are a criminal narco-terrorist gang that floods half the world with drugs, including Spain. And here in our country, they are whitewashed, they are allowed to walk the streets, and the red carpet is rolled out for them so they can come with their dirty money to invest. And now, when they are on their last legs, there are even attempts to whitewash them so they don't look like what they really are. Our duty is to tell you the truth, and we do it every day. Welcome. We investigate.
Castillon Confidential by Albert Castillon.
Friends, we don't realize it, but we are living through historic moments, and not just in Venezuela. Can you imagine if the Cuban dictatorship ends in a very short time? More than 60 years of Cuban dictatorship. If that happens, we'll end up celebrating and even building a monument to Donald Trump as well. Look, what's been happening in the last few hours is that there's much more movement in Cuba than what actually reaches us here. It's true that no Cuban leader has publicly denounced or made a big fuss about the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. They've kept it almost in the background. We know that Donald Trump's plan is to shut off the flow of money and the flow of oil, and they believe that Cuba will fall like ripe fruit ready to drop, that it was already at its limit, and that this dictatorship is about to end. But there are movements. We're not going to tell you everything because we're working to help the Cuban dictatorship fall as soon as possible. But I can tell you that there are contacts, there are meetings, and there are people from Donald Trump's team who are negotiating, and I'm told they're already in Havana. The one who knows the most about all this is Zoe Valdez, our favorite writer. How are you, dear friend?
Very well, dear Albert. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's true, in Havana, Donald Trump has sent someone to start negotiating.
Yes, yesterday that possibility was being discussed a lot. Remember that everything with Cuba isn't like in Venezuela, where things were a bit clearer. With Cuba, everything is very, very unclear. They are experts at creating confusion, and they're also experts at using feints. That was also being said this morning. They themselves denied it, but it could be part of the confusion. It's said that Trump has already been in contact with someone directly, but even Trump hasn't claimed it. He hasn't said anything about that. And it could probably be more about what people want, right? Now, it's true that I see an important movement among the exiled military who have made a statement, and to me, that means a lot.
That statement is telling the military still under the Castro regime that it's over, right? That the deadline has already passed.
So those military officers led by Rafael del Pino, they have sent the following message. Remember that in Cuba, very cleverly, Raúl Castro created military corporations linked to the economy. Of course, nothing has worked in all these decades. So these military officers are saying, be careful. They're telling GESA, they're telling the armed forces, you have to pay very close attention to what is going to be proposed to you or to what is happening regarding the messages that the United States might send, because it could be a terrible ending. And that's what these military officers are putting on the table. I mean, these military officers are very well informed, probably by the United States.
It's different from Venezuela. In Venezuela, they're trying to make Chavismo destroy itself, and there's division. Wouldn't that be the plan for Cuba? What would Trump's proposal be to end the Cuban regime?
I still think, as I told you before on another show, that the United States is probably waiting for Maduro to speak about Cuba and for other people to speak about Cuba. Paulo Carvajal has already spoken in the past, and it's likely that in recent days he has spoken more. That's what Cuba doesn't control, and that's what's important. That Cuba doesn't control that information. They can only guess at it. That's a far cry from actually controlling it. And besides, they control very little. In the program I sent you by Juan Almeida, who is the son of Commander Almeida, one of the main commanders of the so-called revolution, he says something very important. The leadership there is completely in a kind of limbo because there, who could it be? Who could it be? Who could be someone from within the regime who can speak from a position of strong leadership? That doesn't exist. In Venezuela, there used to be even stronger leadership, but that doesn't exist. In Cuba, people don't know the leaders because they never show themselves. They're afraid, they don't go out into the streets, and they don't appear on public platforms. The only one who shows up at the podiums, and you can see how that goes when he can, it's the puppet, which is Miguel Diaz-Canel. And sometimes they put someone there who knows who, but no one else.
Let's talk about that, because one of the pieces of information we get through Zoe Valdez is that Raúl Castro, Fidel Castro's own brother, 94 years old, would be the person with whom negotiations would take place directly or indirectly. At least some envoy from Donald Trump. But the million-dollar question is whether it's the real Raúl Castro or his double. I'm not making anything up. It wouldn't be the first time a dictator has used a double. And not just in Cuba, there were also doubles, right, of Fidel.
See, yes, there were doubles. Even Fidel Castro's double, the first one, went into exile because Fidel Castro suggested he go out in a situation where there was going to be an attack. And Fidel Castro told him, and he said no. And that was Roblan, who later, he was a comedian, also an actor. And after going into exile, well, his whole life he did what had been imposed on him. What had been imposed on him in Cuba was to be Fidel Castro's double, right? So these kinds of things happen in Cuba. Look, I have the information because it's not that the information comes from me. The information comes from Cuba, but also from exile. I always trust information coming from the exile community more because there are a lot of very capable people in exile who can gather more information. The US government, which has a lot of information, that's something you need to know. Look, I watched part of your show today because I didn't have much time, but the man who said the United States doesn't know how to do things, and who I think is a military man, is right to a certain extent. It's not that they don't know how to do things, it's that the United States always expects that on the other side, there will be people who respond, a reality on the ground that will respond. And when that doesn't exist, well, they leave and go away, which is logical because as he himself has said, they work for themselves. Look, Raúl Castro has a double. Everybody knows that, it's obvious. It's even said that the double is better prepared than the original. So the double for political moves could even be better prepared than the original. I suppose that President Trump, given how much importance he attaches to history, is someone whose historical knowledge we shouldn't underestimate. Since the Kennedys, he was very close to the Kennedys. He would love to have a conversation with someone who was a protagonist of that era rather than with any other fool. And that protagonist who remains is Raúl Castro. Who are they going to put forward to do the talking if Trump makes that a condition? I don't think they'll put up the wreck that is Raúl Castro with his 90, almost 100 years, but rather they'll put up his double, who is, according to them, in better physical, intellectual, and even psychological shape to say whatever they tell him to say. Because in Cuba, everything revolves around the Communist Party. Everything is shaped by the Communist Party. That's why it still amazes me so much that today, Iranian opposition members, Venezuelan opposition members talk about socialism because the socialism of that time no longer exists. Now there is a Communist Party that has put on two faces, that of socialism, that of Islamic socialism, and that of Islamic communism and communism.
Let's watch a video that I checked with Zoe, and everyone thinks it's a double, that it's not Raúl Castro who appears in the footage. These are recent videos because he is rarely seen. And notice that in the few public appearances he makes, people who know Raúl Castro notice physical differences, small ones, but they notice them. For example, in height, in posture, in gestures, or in the way he walks. And also, the state apparatus already makes sure that when it's the double, the images are taken from a distance, never close-ups. It's all a plan. Watch this video. We believe it's Raúl Castro's double. Watch. I see him moving very agilely, Zoe, for a 94-year-old. That would be a factor to consider, judging by your reaction. Then they tell me that the real Raúl Castro, when he does speak or appear, he's very expressive, very prone to shouting and waving his arms. When he's just standing there quietly shaking hands, he barely speaks and doesn't shout at all. Suspicious, isn't it?
Yes, very suspicious. Also, look, I don't agree with what Don Juan Almeida says, even though he's right about many things, because he was very close to Raúl Castro. Raúl Castro practically raised him. That Raúl wouldn't be the figure to speak, to have a dialogue because of his age. You can see there's a double, obviously. Not just because of that, but because he doesn't have leadership. That doesn't matter to Trump. What Trump wants is the historical figure. I mean, the leadership he has today, which is fake, he still has it. I mean, people still, there are one or two generations that still follow those historical leaders. The American government knows that. Americans know that. Look, the double, also there are gestures from Raúl Castro, which were very precise gestures that the double has studied, but he doesn't have them. I also remember when the Chaplin Cinema was inaugurated in Cuba, that Geraldine Chaplin went to Cuba with her son. I was very close to Raúl Castro because we were invited. I was working at the Cuban Cinematographic Institute. At that time, I was a student who was doing a kind of social service. That's what they call it, right? And Raúl Castro is a person, as you just said, who moves a lot and has gestures that are very characteristic of him, just like Fidel Castro did. The double doesn't have that. Sometimes he remembers and repeats them, but not very well. But the double, if you notice, has a bit more intensity. As I would say smarter, because Raúl Castro was never... Uber Matos himself used to say that Raúl Castro was, Fidel Castro used to make fun of his brother a lot for that because he was stupid. And that's what happened. A stupid person, of course, but very dangerous, no doubt, because he has killed a lot of people.
Saddam Hussein, Hitler, Stalin, Fidel Castro. Yes, Raúl Castro also has a double. And maybe now the double is the key figure, not the original, to reaching an agreement and ending the dictatorship. We were never this close. Maybe this time it will happen, right, Zoe?
I think so. I'm very hopeful. There are many Cubans who are hopeful. The only thing is, we have to warn the Cuban people that they need to be prepared for what will be demanded in return for such monumental support. Remember the time, remember what they did, what the United States did in France, and what happened with Charles de Gaulle, what the United States intended. Charles de Gaulle stopped it, but it was the United States who liberated France from Nazi occupation in World War II. Their role was fundamental. I mean, nobody can ignore that. And then they expect, of course, that the people will be behind them, that there is, above all, organized movements and parties already exist. I, for example, handle foreign relations for the Cuban Republican Party. this is within the party. I have my own movement, which is the Martiano Libertarian Republican Movement, which has a website, movimientocubano.com. There you will see that there are projects for government changes, which probably no one will implement, but it's there so that whoever can do it does it. I always say that the leader of the Cuban people walks anonymously through the streets of Cuba, and that on July 11th and 12th, 2021, the Cuban people proved that they could be their own leader.
Long live hope and long live free Cuba, because you and I will see it today. We will celebrate it and you will be able to return to your country.
I want to tell you something. I am so grateful to you for what you do for my country. Because every day you dedicate so much to my country, and we Cubans will never be able to forget that. Thank you.
Albert Castillon, thanks for that. I know you do the same for me. A big kiss, dear. Everything for Spain. I know. Thank you, Zoe Valdez.
Castillon Confidential by Albert Castillon.
How nice, so much hope in the messages we receive from Venezuela and Cuba. Ladies and gentlemen, after 26 years, after 67 years, I believe, in Cuba, if this ends in a matter of months, we are living through historic moments that we will have to remember for the rest of our lives. Here with us is the great Carlos Marcos, our political analyst. How are you, Carlos?
Very well. Good morning, Albert.
Did you expect to see the end of Castroism?
I really wished for it, but it will be thanks once again to Donald Trump that we can see the Cuban people get their lives back, because right now the Cuban people are experiencing famine, suffering, pain, and poverty. All of this is because of the Communist Party, the Castro family, and those who want to perpetuate that bloody dictatorship, which it is, to restore a democratic state. And there is Donald Trump once again. We can discuss international law later, if that's okay with you.
Yes, because of course Castro died. His brother is 94 years old, but Castroism continues. And here in Spain, there are countless actors, singers, intellectuals who still adore Castroism and travel there defending Castroism. The list would be immense. So the reason it remains is because some people whitewash it, right? Even to this day.
There's no doubt about it, no doubt at all. What I don't see is the Cuban people being happy. I see the Cuban people suffering. It's like those protests against Donald Trump where there's a small group of people, but not a single Venezuelan among them. That is to say, all the demonstrations in favor of US intervention are full of Venezuelans. And all those who are against it are privileged progressives who experience the dictatorship through television in the comfort of their living room. And they have no empathy at all for those people who are subjugated, persecuted, and killed. And in Venezuela, even today, those torture centers that were opened by Chavismo and maintained by Maduro are still operating. And they are a machine for destroying human beings who have not been defended by anyone for so long.
We like brave people on this show, and among them is a young man who ran for his life so he wouldn't be killed. And luckily today he is one of the most recognized voices against the Chavista regime. Andres Villavicencio, how are you?
Thank you very much, Albert, for the invitation once again. I'm doing very well, hoping that the transition that has already begun continues until freedom and democracy are restored in Venezuela.
Hey, tomorrow, Thursday, Maria Corina Machado will be at the White House meeting with Donald Trump. What do you expect?
I hope she tells him what the vast majority of Venezuelans feel and what the vast majority of us voted for. When we decided to elect Edmundo Gonzalez as the president-elect of Venezuela, who was later forced into exile, but being exiled doesn't make him any less the president-elect. Venezuela has a legitimate authority ready to take power after the transition. Furthermore, Maria Corina Machado has explained on numerous occasions what her plan is for the first 100 hours and the first 100 days to stabilize the country. She's a person who has prepared herself for this moment. And as a Venezuelan, I am very grateful for the political leadership of Maria Corina Machado. She is equal to the historic moment our country is living through. Let President Trump know so he understands the transition can start as soon as possible.
We are in times when we have to point out those who have allowed, and there are many Spaniards on that list, a regime that kills and tortures to remain in power for almost 30 years. And then those who have benefited from it, for example, Rodriguez Zapatero, for example, Monedero, Pablo Iglesias, Irene Montero, the list goes on, Baltasar Garzón, the list is endless. There are many Spaniards. Some have become millionaires with drug money from Venezuela. Look, I think it's time to remember that this man you're about to see was a professor at the Complutense University of Madrid. He taught politics, Juan Carlos Monedero. Meanwhile, a few months ago, in 2025, he went to the Helicoid prison, a torture center, to give a human rights course. Look.
More than a lecture, I wanted to share with you a class we put together with the Situation Room, which is committed to training. The Situation Room has understood that if there is a sector in the country that has to...
There were a lot of police officers and officials in the room at El Helicoide, and he gave a talk about human rights. Look, seriously, it seems like a bad joke, dark humor, and he charged for it like he charges for everything. And among other things in that talk, he denied that there were political prisoners in the Helicoide. And when he left there, and this is for you, Carlos, he went to the Complutense University to teach Spanish students and students from other countries. When are we going to do a thorough cleanup of those who indoctrinate, manipulate, those who take dirty money from narco-dictatorships and are walking next to us on the street?
The other day on this show, I said two things. First, I said that I thought the words Donald Trump used to describe Maria Corina were very unfortunate, very disproportionate, right? Because he could have said, let's give it time, but not disqualify her like that, saying she didn't have respect or support. For now, Maria Corina is the winner, along with Edmundo, clearly, of an election that was stolen from the Venezuelan people, and therefore she deserves respect. And I said it here. But also, I understood and I understand that it is the responsibility of the American government to make public a list of names of people who have collaborated, who have whitewashed Maduro's regime. And among them is this miserable intellectual Monedero. Because you have to be a miserable intellectual, a moral indigent, to go to a torture center to talk with those who know they are being tortured about human rights. It's laughing in their faces, humiliating them, degrading them, and contributing to the whitewashing of the murderer who is torturing them, who is none other than Nicolas Maduro, and also Delcy and Diosdado Cabello. That's why I want to believe that the transition Trump has set in motion will happen. A daily trickle of 8 people released is not enough for me. I can't accept the cynicism of a collaborator like Rodriguez Zapatero. Who paid for those 37 trips Rodriguez Zapatero made to Caracas? Where did he stay? Who covered those expenses? How much was he paid for those trips? That doesn't affect domestic politics. And we Spaniards need to know if it's true that this list of names you've mentioned, and to which many more could be added, have benefited from money stained with blood. From the blood of Venezuelans who demanded their freedom, who stood up for their freedom, who fought for freedom. And that Maduro's government, Maduro's dictatorship, used what the progressives now call international law as their protective shield. But we're crazy. I mean, we know what's happening in Venezuela, and there's no organization, not the UN, not any global organization that can intervene. What do we do? Are we just going to watch Iran kill 2,000 people in the streets while international law says nothing more than, this can't be done because international law doesn't cover it? Stop the nonsense. They're killing people in the streets. Like Maduro killed people in torture centers. They disappeared. Why do they talk about political prisoners? How many disappeared are there? Just like there were in Cuba, just like there still are. Communist dictatorships like those in Venezuela or Cuba, or the theocratic regime of the Ayatollahs, wipe people out and bury them. By the way, let me make an aside. I want to remind you that very recently, it was the 90th anniversary of when the Spanish Republic, the government, the Republic, killed between 2,500 and 5,000 people. Because not even those who are buried in a mass grave in Paracuelos del Jarama are registered. For these people, there is no historical memory, no historical justice, nothing at all except contempt and ostracism. Well, I want to stand up for them. 90 years ago, the government of the Republic murdered around 5,000 people by direct order of Santiago Carrillo, who was the leader of the Communist Party and of the government that ordered the killing of people who were in state custody. The same thing that's happening in Venezuela, exactly the same thing that's happening in Cuba, and we have to respond to this. And when they use international law to cover up for the murderers, international law is just a dead letter and means nothing.
For anyone who hasn't been there, what is El Helicoide, Andres?
Let me tell you, El Helicoide is a torture center that is certified by the United Nations. And there's also an article on the BBC and a documentary on the BBC that talks about it in detail. But let me tell you, it wasn't always a torture center. At first, in the 1950s, when it was created, it was meant to be a shopping center. And it's a gigantic pharaonic infrastructure in the center of Caracas that includes a heliport and luxury elevators. Unfortunately, the businessmen went bankrupt in the 1950s, and this building was nationalized. And then when Chavismo came to power, they turned it into a torture center. We say it's a kind of Death Star of 21st century socialism. And it's truly unfortunate what we've seen there. Not only because of the torture and the killings, but also because of the suffering of the families who have been outside demanding justice or proof of life for their loved ones without getting it. Or that we've seen scum like Juan Carlos Monedero go to talk about human rights in a place where human rights are violated and even give a human rights workshop with the torturers. It has been the greatest infamy ever committed against Venezuela. And let me also tell you that when all of this was happening in Venezuela, none of these people talked about international law. None of these people talked about human rights. And right now, the process that Nicolas Maduro is facing of being brought to justice is a process in which his rights are being respected. It's a process where no one is torturing him. It's a process where he has access to medical care. It's a process where he had access to a lawyer. It's also a public and well-known process where everyone has seen it and the whole world has had proof of life, that he is still alive, that he is still well, and that no one has made an attempt on his life. All those legal guarantees and all those components of due process. Nicolas Maduro did not offer these things to his political prisoners or to those he executed extrajudicially. He didn't offer them to the kidnapped, the disappeared, or to families who suffered torture and deaths of loved ones.
Very important. We were talking, and I think it's time to start remembering things we've talked about here about accomplices. Pablo Iglesias, Irene Montero, and Juan Carlos Monedero are accomplices of the narco-dictatorship. Well, with Zapatero, we would need a separate chapter. He's the great ambassador of the dictator. But for example, people like Jose Bono. Jose Bono was Minister of Defense under Zapatero. He sold a lot of ships and frigates to Hugo Chavez. And they set up a strange business in which there was a company acting as an intermediary in a sale from one country to another. Why should there be any intermediary? Well, there was one. For what purpose? To take illegal commissions that amounted to around 40 million euros. And then another name, Baltasar Garzon, the lawyer who used to be a judge and was removed from the bench for judicial misconduct. Nicolas Maduro hired Baltasar Garzon several times. The last time in 2016, the goal was to file legal actions against PDVSA suppliers. The truth is that at that time, Baltasar Garzon was starting his relationship with the then Attorney General Dolores Delgado, and that's what Maduro wanted, to be close to the Attorney General. How much did Garzon charge just for that contract? 8,800,000 euros of Chavista money. Then defending Maduro's frontman Alex Saab, 4 million more. That is, when you see a lot of chalets and estates in Spain owned by the people we're mentioning, and we can start from the Marquises of Galapa on down, think about where the money comes from. We were talking about Zapatero. Lawrence Saleh was here 4 years in La Tumba. The interview we did with him had a lot of impact and it was very moving. This is the moment when Loren remembers how Zapatero insisted, harassed, and scolded his mother after 2 years imprisoned, asking her please not to criticize the regime. Listen, did Zapatero really call your mother?
Yes, my mom met with him on several occasions. And well, as you know, I was kidnapped in Bogota and they put me in La Tumba, which is a torture center located in downtown Caracas, in the basement of the Bolivarian Intelligence Service. This torture center is below the Caracas subway. And we were there. I had already been there for 2 years. And my mom was involved in one of the complaints she made about what they were doing to me. He called her to scold her, to reprimand her, because she shouldn't have been saying that, and he acted like some kind of censor for the families of the political prisoners.
What did he say to her? That if she criticized the regime, it would be harder to get you out?
Yes, and that she shouldn't do that, because if she did, he wouldn't help her, that she had to stay quiet, otherwise he wouldn't. I mean, imagine telling a mother that her only son is locked up in there, right? But the thing is, Zapatero has always played that sinister role. Look, do you know who Zapatero brought here? Rodriguez Torres. Rodriguez Torres was the one who created La Tumba. He was the one who he persecuted us in the student movement. He is responsible for the deaths of many young people and students. He was the mastermind behind the repressive apparatus of Chavismo. He built it. He co-architected it with Luis Ortega Diaz, a friend of Zapatero, who is also here.
The prosecutor who has now set up a consulting firm in Madrid, which we talked about in the editorial. In other words, we have torturers walking around, Zapatero's advisors in Madrid, many of them, more than one. A prosecutor who looked the other way and imprisoned opposition members is opening a consulting firm in the capital. Absolute impunity. Why? Because they feel untouchable, because the Sanchez government is in power. Or maybe, Carlos, even if Feiju comes to power, they would still be just as untouchable. That's another thing.
I don't know, Albert. There are two things that really catch my attention. Zapatero, who is a guy that used to appear a lot in the media and liked to show his face, has been missing for 9 days. He hasn't said a word. Interestingly, the Socialist Party already hit Zapatero during the last campaign in Extremadura. They must have sensed something because he's disappeared. But it's also been 9 days since any drug boats heading to the United States carrying drugs have been spotted. Since Trump intervened, those drug boats have disappeared. Therefore, the connection seems direct to me. And there's something that I find especially disgusting, which is the insistence of the left-wing media and the Spanish government on whitewashing Zapatero. I'm afraid it's because they see what's coming for him. They sell Zapatero as the liberator of political prisoners. It's a big lie, a huge lie. The political prisoners who are being released by order of Donald Trump and the United States government. And the silence of those who have been released is striking. I'm very afraid that they are under threat. Don't speak out because those who remain inside could have a very hard time. I'm afraid that's the case. But remember that in Spain, there are many Venezuelans who have fled the dictatorship, people who have come here to save their lives, up to 8 million around the world. But be careful, because there are also Chavistas who have come to hide in Spain with their great fortunes. And they go around buying apartments in the Salamanca neighborhood for 6, 7, 8, and 12 million, and they try to hide their scandals here. We will also have to look into those Venezuelans who are here using Spain as a refuge with the tolerance of the government, the Socialist Party, and the communists to enjoy here the money stolen from their fellow countrymen. These are issues that cannot be left unresolved. And Donald Trump also has an obligation to reveal these things. The world needs to know who has been collaborating, who has gotten rich off Maduro's bloody government, where they are, and why.
Why don't those who were released speak? Why do they remain silent? Andres, they tell me that's what Rodriguez Torres is for, the former general who's a friend of Zapatero, to remind them that they have family there. But it happened to Edmundo Gonzalez. Edmundo Gonzalez came here, had won elections, and kept completely quiet, and even thanked Zapatero at some point. Of course, he had half his family in Caracas and some in jail. What is that? Is it blackmail?
Look, every time we see statements from released prisoners, their relatives, or even from the president-elect Edmundo Gonzalez, let's remember that they have family members in Venezuela who are under threat. And many times, a lot of the context behind what President-elect Edmundo Gonzalez does or says is because his daughter, his grandchildren, and his son-in-law are being held hostage in Venezuela. His daughter, she is at home just like his grandchildren, but of course she is under threat. And his son-in-law was missing for more than 300 days, during which no one knew if he was still alive. They never received any proof of life. The place where he was being held was unknown. They didn't know what he was being charged with, and they didn't know when he would be brought before a court. When that finally happened, almost a year later, look, they took him to court to sentence him and gave him the maximum Venezuelan penalty, which is 30 years, without having held any kind of trial. I mean, that's how the Venezuelan dictatorship treats its prisoners. That's how the Venezuelan dictatorship treats its hostages. And it's unfortunate, it's disgusting that people like Rodriguez Zapatero dedicate themselves to lobbying in favor of the dictatorship. And I say lobbying in every sense of the word because Rodriguez Zapatero is not only a pawn of the Chavista regime in Spain, he is the main pawn of the Chavista system in all of Europe. And that's easy to say. But it's extremely serious because I believe that when the Chavista regime finally falls and the transition has been fully completed, several scandals will start coming to light, many truths will come out, and everything hidden under the rug will start being exposed, as they say here in Spain. And we will understand the connections of many people and many pro-Chavista activists who, in the last week, and especially in recent days, have been efficiently defending the indefensible, which is defending the dictatorship. And look, Albert, it's not just about defending the Chavista regime anymore. Now they're attacking the Venezuelan diaspora. I mean, they took their ties to the regime to another level. Now, they don't just defend the dictatorship, but exiles like us are parasites, as a Podemos congresswoman said. Or we're worms, as Antonio Maestre called us, among other nice things that have been said in recent weeks. Notice that it's precisely in these moments when you see the true face of the far left. They're xenophobic, they're classist, because they've also called us poor fascists. Many Venezuelans who have recently migrated or been exiled have had to work in construction, or many have done delivery jobs. And of course, we're not ashamed to admit it. We'd be ashamed to be communists who whitewash dictatorships like Antonio Maestre or Mrs. Valverde, a Podemos congresswoman who called us parasites. I'm sure that justice, just as it caught up with Nicolas Maduro in different countries, will soon begin to catch up with his accomplices as well.
One of them, Ione Belarra from Podemos, a party funded by Iran and Venezuela, is at a press conference, and the only journalist who asks the question we all want is Vito Quiles. This is the moment.
Ms. Belarra, I wanted to ask you what you think about one of your deputies calling Venezuelans living in Spain parasites when you earn 109,000 euros a year and live off the state. And why haven't you talked about international law? In 27 years of the Chavista dictatorship, you haven't said a single word about international law, Ms. Belarra, in 27 years of dictatorship?
You don't have the floor, and it's unbelievable you're still here. You should have been thrown out already.
It's odd you haven't left with Maduro, considering how much you support him. You say it's unbelievable I'm still here, but it's more surprising you're still around. Why support a free Palestine but not a free Venezuela, Ms. Belarra?
Please show respect to your colleagues.
Why free Palestine but not free Venezuela? It's a question many people are asking.
Your colleagues are telling you that you don't have the floor. I don't even have to say it. Your colleagues are telling you that you don't have the floor.
Can you wait your turn to speak? Respect the press.
You're making a fool of yourself getting paid to be a Chavista, man.
I wanted to ask you your opinion about this meeting.
And now they're already asking you the same absurd things they always ask, Andres.
If I may comment, this is embarrassing. How embarrassing to not answer that question. Also, you must be shameless to act as a spokesperson for the oppressed while earning 109,000 euros a year from public funds. It's just unbelievable, as you guys say. It's mind-blowing, honestly.
No, and on top of that, wanting to kick out anyone who doesn't think like you. I mean, there's no greater dictator than this champagne socialist left used to living off public money. Marcos, they want us out. If they were in power, they'd shut down the media, throw us in jail. We'd end up like Venezuela, right, Carlos?
There's not the slightest doubt about it. It's communism. Communism is the same everywhere. It seeks to increase poverty. As we've already said here, Commander Chavez himself once told an advisor who encouraged him to improve people's quality of life so they could rise in socioeconomic status, and Chavez replied, "You haven't understood the revolution. We're not interested in ending poverty because the poor vote for us, and when they become middle class, they'll stop voting for us." This is the communist philosophy. The communists, and in Spain, they've already set that process in motion. In Spain, the middle class has been pushed to the bottom of the pyramid, effectively destroyed. For what purpose? So that they need to live off subsidies, off the handouts the government gives to people, turning them into dependents of the state. And that policy not only leads to moral poverty, it impoverishes a country, but there isn't a single communist country where people are content and happy. Quite the opposite. Communism is the ideology that has killed the most human beings in the entire world. This is not up for debate. And Podemos in Spain is the revival of the most extreme communism. Of course, they would persecute us. You and I, and Andres, of course, the three of us would be in jail, probably in a torture center. And since that's not enough for them, they would go after our families because they have that meanness that defines them, that inner hatred that drives them to fight, so that the communist leaders can live like kings, which is what happens in all the communist countries in the world. Maduro and his family are multimillionaires, and his team lives very well because they don't care at all about the suffering of their people. They bleed them on purpose.
I want you not to forget, and I'd like your opinion, Andres, about what the King of Spain said. Because look, with Sanchez, you can expect anything, since allegedly he has been financed by this dirty money. The courts will prove it, I hope. But we expected something different from the king. And when several Spaniards were released, he said the same phrase that Sanchez said, this one.
We should all be glad about the release of 5 compatriots and other citizens who were also being held. It's a necessary step in the direction that...
Held, not in prison, not kidnapped, not tortured for more than a year. Held as if they were stuck in a traffic jam. I'm asking for your opinion, but first let's listen to Llanos and Meiva, listeners.
Your Majesty, to say that the political prisoners and tortured people of Venezuela are detained citizens, I would expect that from the Prime Minister, but not from the one I considered my king. You are more educated than I am, and I can clearly see those faces when they are released. These citizens are political prisoners who have been tortured. I hope you regain your good judgment soon.
I already said before that it seems like the person who writes the speeches for both of them seems to be the same. At the time, with the issue of Gaza, well, at the UN, both of them were talking about genocide. And now it's the same speech. Regarding those in Venezuela, they call them detainees, not prisoners. We know who we're talking about, right?
No doubt. How have those of you in exile here taken it? Did you expect such a dirty and painful move from the king? At least for the Spanish, it is.
Well, I understand that by constitutional mandate, the king's role must be as neutral as possible. So I understand why that happened. Of course, I would have liked things to be called what they are, but I understand that the king's role and the dignity of the office of head of state implies a certain neutrality. But another thing I wanted to say was that precisely, yes, the impoverishment in communist systems, as Carlos mentioned a while ago, was something we experienced in Venezuela from the very beginning. And then we saw things like, for example, a minister named Hector Rodriguez, who in a meeting in a kind of popular assembly said, "We are not going to lift you out of poverty into the middle class, because then you would aspire to be in the opposition." And there's another statement from Tarek El Aissami, who is a minister, a former minister, former president of PDVSA, who is currently imprisoned because he created a corruption scheme where they stole $23 billion, where he said, I am proud to come to the poorest neighborhoods because the more poverty you find, the more loyalty there is to the revolution. And of course, they created a clientelist system of deliberate impoverishment to make people dependent on the state, and through that dependence on the state, they exercise social control. And what happened in Venezuela on July 28, 2024, was a healthy civic rebellion against that oppression and against that impoverishment and against the desire to live in freedom. And that your greatest aspiration is not for the state to bring you a box of food once every 2 weeks, which is what Chavismo wants Venezuelans to aspire to. And I have always said it, communism and socialism, which are unnatural, are doomed to fail in Venezuela and to be despised by the vast majority of Venezuelans, because in Venezuela, there has never been a woman born who wishes for her child to be poor. In Venezuela, we want prosperity. In Venezuela, we want freedom. And in Venezuela, we want a country with order that allows us to achieve our dreams there and not have to go into exile, whether for economic reasons or directly because of political persecution.
About the king, I expect neutrality, Andres, but so that he doesn't tell me who he votes for, not so that now he does or doesn't defend human rights, depending on how things are going for him. With Gaza, it's genocide. With Venezuelans, it's detention. That's not what I expect from the king. He is disappointing entire generations. I know, Carlos, that it hurts you to talk about it because you were, I don't know if you still are, very monarchist. But this king needs a reset, or we need to do without him.
I, Albert, have defended the institution of the monarchy here against the republic. Spain's experience with the First and Second Republics does not make that system advisable at all. That being said, I am deeply ashamed of King Felipe VI. Detained? That's like saying that the guys they're hanging in Iran today, the ones they're actually hanging, actually executing, just had a collar put around their necks. They are being hanged, not detained. They are kidnapped. Many of them without any judicial process, without any legal guarantees, without seeing their families for 2 or 3 years. They are not detained, sir. They are not detained. They are kidnapped by the dictatorship. They are victims of the dictatorship. And it's a shame that the King of Spain, who is an educated man, and I understand, Andres, his diplomacy and his courtesy, but that can't stop me from saying what I think after having defended the institution so many times. I am ashamed of those statements from the king that bear the signature of Bolaños and Moncloa. But the king is not a mere reciter. He doesn't have to read those shameful pages they send him to say that people who are isolated in a torture chamber are being detained. No, sir, come on, have some courage. Put on the king's crown and call a spade a spade. And if they get angry in Moncloa, let them get angry. Better honor without a ship than a ship without honor, sir.
Message to King Felipe VI, and if you allow me, some opinions about Zapatero, Fernandez, and Pepe.
Trying to whitewash Zapatero's image, wanting us to believe that thanks to him political prisoners have been freed, including 5 Spaniards. I think it's the most disgraceful thing that the spokespeople of this inquisitorial excuse for a government we have could do. You can see with each passing day that these people have no limits.
Padrino the Skull, who comes out saying that our actor Zapatero, who has mediated in that these last 2 weeks, that thanks to Zapatero too, that the release of the prisoners is thanks to Zapatero. When we have already heard all the statements from the Venezuelans about what they think of Zapatero, no Venezuelan speaks well of Zapatero or any left-wing government, of course.
But yes, many of you speak well of Donald Trump, although there is debate, there always is. Meneses, Tony, Sofia, and Joaquin, who is an insider who has written a letter to Donald Trump and is showing it to us.
Clearly, I think Marco Rubio has made it very clear. One of the main projects of the Trump administration is to eliminate socialism, to eradicate it, or at least leave it paralyzed. And for that, well, the main and primary thing is first to exterminate the rats, the fat rats, the leaders. That is Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, Delcy Rodriguez. Then also exterminate the cockroaches. The cockroaches are Zapatero, Pedro Sanchez, Jose Bono, Jose Blanco.
It's not just about an economic interest on the part of the United States. Of course, the United States is going to look out for its interests, but of course its interests in a world as globalized as the one we live in It's also about the United States regaining its position in the world. So China has taken a large part of the power it used to have.
I'm not going to doubt that the United States has its interests in Venezuela, in the countries of South America, but what's the other alternative? Should the Venezuelan people starve to death with no resources under the boot of a torturing dictatorship? I think that the Venezuelan people are very clear about it for the most part, and that the United States is not going to let them starve or torture them.
Send a letter to President Donald Trump. I don't know if it will do any good, but my intention is to convey to you that, as a member of civil society, one cannot just stand by. And I would like other Spaniards to join in.
He talks about Zapatero in this letter and warns him about what Zapatero has done in relation to Chavismo. Look, get ready for tomorrow because we have some confidential information that has just reached us. And I have the accusations that Zapatero would have to face in the United States because, yes, he is being investigated, as we already mentioned here. And there are many, starting with illicit enrichment. So many that they could even request extradition, but I'll tell you about that tomorrow. Allow me to take a moment to address a couple of domestic issues that concern me. Sanchez's wife, Begoña Gomez, asked Judge Peinado to hand over her passport in November. Here we said, and we believe it's true and we stand by it, that she requested dual citizenship, that she applied for Dominican citizenship without losing her Spanish citizenship. They have never denied it, neither from the Dominican Republic nor from Spain. Begoña Gomez refuses to hand over her passport to Judge Peinado, to the point that the judge asked the police to go to the Moncloa Palace to collect Begoña Gomez's passport. And Cristina Alvarez is in the same position. How do you interpret this, Carlos? That the president's wife does not cooperate with the justice system and refuses to hand over her passport.
I know it's a rhetorical question, but it would be like declaring herself guilty from the very first minute. I mean, they're all in escape mode right now. Sanchez clings to his seat at Moncloa because it's his last lifeline he has left. He plays with lies, with false promises, with the housing issue, with decree laws that he knows he won't be able to validate in parliament because he doesn't have a majority. But he already announced it to us months ago. You can't deny that. I'm willing to govern without the legislature, that is, disregarding popular sovereignty and the institution that represents it. This Sanchez, a tyrant, a potential dictator, who has some limitations because Spain resists ceasing to be a democratic country. But it has a president who acts as if he were living in a dictatorship. And so he spins one lie after another because he has no ability to legislate anything. And his wife, who interestingly enough has also been missing from public life for a few months, when before she used to appear all the time. If it is confirmed, and I think it is more than confirmed, her dual Dominican nationality, she will probably end up having to travel with the Dominican passport, if that's even possible. We are in the hands of an organized mafia that pulls the strings of power in Spain from Moncloa and is rotting the foundations of Spanish democracy. That's why it's so urgent for the Spanish people to speak up, because we're heading in the same direction as Venezuela 25 years ago. I remember my dear Venezuelan friends when the bolo, as they called the bolivar, was almost at parity with the dollar, and today it's a worthless currency. It's worthless because the real business is done in dollars. That's what they like the Americans for. And Baltasar Garzon got paid in dollars in the despicable money of the Yankees. That's what Baltasar Garzon and Monedero were paid in. And the financing of Podemos, that's the issue. The big lie is that there's a people under the boot of a dictator who are bleeding out. That's why it's so urgent that all political prisoners are released. And it should be a priority for Donald Trump. Because until the last one is out on the street, they're all condemned to silence so as not to harm those still inside. Everyone out on the street, and then we'll start to know the truth. But Trump has an obligation to go a bit further in the transition to democracy, to inspire those people who have seen a light at the end of the tunnel after so many years of persecution, oppression, and government cruelty, that light of hope must be nurtured, Mr. Trump. And for that, we have to move forward. It's essential that they see the end of the tunnel getting closer. And everyone, Mr. President of the United States, is watching you. You have two options: to follow through and help bring about full democracy in Venezuela, or not follow through and just keep the oil. That would be a historic mistake, Mr. President.
A direct message. I agree with taking bigger steps. You too, right, Andres?
Of course, absolutely. In fact, the issue of releasing political prisoners would be a good first step and a good first sign that this time it's different. And not just releasing them little by little, but releasing all of them, full freedom for everyone. That's what we're demanding. And you see, in Venezuela, we've witnessed a macabre game in recent years, which we call the revolving door. Chavismo tends to release 40 Venezuelan political prisoners, and that same week they imprison 100 new political prisoners. So what will be the real test, as you say here, is that in the coming days there are no new unjust detentions, no new prisoners of conscience are kidnapped, as we say in Venezuela, that for thinking differently, for being in the opposition, they start getting taken back to torture centers. But instead, there should be full freedom for these political prisoners, and no new political prisoners should exist. And another thing would be to see a change in the armed forces. Unfortunately, the armed forces in Venezuela have been stripped of their constitutional role. We have a very specific article, which is 328, that says the armed forces are a professional component without political affiliation. You see a parade in Venezuela, any military parade, on any national holiday. And you see Venezuelan soldiers shouting ideological slogans like homeland, socialism, or death, and that kind of thing. It would be another good sign if the ideological use and manipulation of the armed forces ended and they returned to being an institution that serves all Venezuelans. They should also start demobilizing the paramilitary gangs that Chavismo armed under the protection of the state and that committed crimes against all Venezuelans with absolute impunity because they were close to the Chavista regime. In Venezuela, we call them colectivos. I know that here in Spain, the word colectivo has a different meaning, but in Venezuela, colectivos refers to armed gangs, paramilitaries, urban guerrillas armed by Chavismo, who commit crimes against all of us with total impunity. Demobilizing them, disarming them, going after them would be another good first sign that things have genuinely changed in Venezuela.
How long have you been in Spain, Andres?
I arrived on August 19, 2024, a year and a half ago.
Well, let me tell you something crazy, nothing to do with this. We're talking about sports, but more about money. Can you imagine that in our country, the Spanish Super Cup has been held in Saudi Arabia since 2019? What do you make of that?
I don't understand what the origin of the tradition might have been.
No, there's no tradition. There's no tradition. In 2019, they decided that the Spanish Super Cup, a football competition between Spanish teams, instead of being held in Spain, would be held in Saudi Arabia. And it's the same every year. Julio Salinas, a Barca player, has said enough and has recorded this video. It's controversial.
Playing the Supercopa in Arabia is crap. These statements were made by Iñaki Williams, although he later clarified that maybe he hadn't chosen the right word. But deep down, it's what all of us think. Then there's a detail that you might have missed. The other day, during the matches that Barca and Real Madrid played, the whole stadium, all the fans' shirts had the crest changed. Barca didn't show the Cross of St. George, a symbol of both the city and Catalonia. In its place, there was either a horizontal stripe or a vertical stripe, but never the cross. In the case of Real Madrid, they also didn't wear the crown that represents the Spanish monarchy of Christian tradition. The explanation they give is that in an Islamic country, any display or symbols not related to Islam are prohibited. And I ask you, my friends, does money justify everything? Shouldn't Barca and Real Madrid take a stand and say, this is my limit, and refuse to tolerate more? Because I'm telling you, the only one who benefits here is the Royal Spanish Football Federation, which makes 26 million euros. Barca and Madrid make 7, and Atleti makes 2. If these matches were played there, home and away, like they used to be, you'd actually make even more.
Carlos, this was invented by Gerard Piqué in exchange for a 40 million commission, and now it's become permanent. Spain Spain is a country where the Vuelta a España starts in France or Portugal and where the Football Super Cup is held in Saudi Arabia. Well, we're very complicated. If I were Andres, I wouldn't understand a lot of things. How do you explain it, Carlos?
Let me clarify one thing first. Julio Salinas was a player for Barça, but he made his mark in my hometown at Deportivo de La Coruña.
For me, he'll always be a Barça player, but that's okay.
This is my point. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, in the same way, these are very troubling signs. Remember that Nicolas Maduro decided that Christmas in Venezuela would start in March so that Venezuelans would think about something else. Now, imagine if they told us we're going to have the Holy Week processions in Morocco. We're out of our minds. It's the Spanish Super Cup. There are 4 Spanish teams. We're not going to a particularly democratic country. They're going there for money. And if everything is about money, if the principles of a country, if the dignity of a country has a price and it's paid in money, that country has no dignity, no principles, no shame, and that's what's happening. There's a president of the federation who continues with a story that Gerard Piqué invented to make a lot of money. And for that, he sacrifices. And we Spaniards have to watch that final on TV from Arabia because one man feels like it in exchange for several million. That's not right. That's not right. Either you have principles or you don't. If they have a price, they're not principles.
I just wanted to make a brief comment about this. During my time here, I've noticed that parties like Podemos are the ones whitewashing the Chavista dictatorship and showing xenophobia toward the Venezuelan diaspora. They are parties that at the same time try to sell a kind of black legend or cultural self-erasure to make people feel ashamed of who they are or feel ashamed of their own history. I don't think there's any reason to believe that black legend. I believe that Spain is a wonderful country with a history full of glorious deeds beyond its borders, and it is a country to be very proud of. So these people who are always trying to destroy who we are the ones we must not allow to win this cultural battle.
They're the ones who boo when the anthem plays at a match, at a soccer final. It's the same thing we're talking about. Well, and Julio Iglesias, before you go, since you've dedicated your whole life to the world of art and music, Carlos, Julio Iglesias, ladies and gentlemen, our most beloved artist. He has been accused by 2 former employees of sexual assault. The prosecutor's office is deciding whether to get involved or not, whether it has jurisdiction or not, because the events happened in 2021 outside of Spain. But of course, at the time they happened, Julio Iglesias would have already been in his 70-something. Now he's already 82. What's your take on this, Carlos? Because before it was Plácido Domingo. We've already had other recent examples. There are people who start spreading the message, I think. That's how I see it. I imagine an 80-year-old man who's a bit handsy, and it's almost funny. You joke with him, and then you leave. Why would you take him to court?
Let's take it step by step. There is no complaint filed in any court. The supposed victims haven't reported anything. There is no complaint in the Dominican Republic, in the Bahamas, or in Spain. It's a report from a media outlet, not just any media outlet. It's a media outlet serving Sanchismo. The newspaper Punto Es. Curiously, in the worst moments of Sanchismo, a report once appeared against Plácido Domingo, which also didn't lead anywhere. But it deeply damaged the image of a great artist on a global level who always represented Spain. Recently, they tried to attack Adolfo Suarez. A lady said that Adolfo Suarez had tried to assault her 50 years ago. And now Julio Iglesias. Now we're not debating Sanchez's ETA associates. We're not talking about the concessions to the Catalan separatists. Not about the budgets or the funding either. Now all the media are focused on Julio Iglesias. I don't know if Julio Iglesias did that or not. I've met Julio Iglesias because we've organized several concerts for him in Galicia. I have to say all of them were wonderful. And yes, we did have problems getting women out of the dressing room because they wanted to force their way in. And poor Julio honestly had a really hard time with it. I don't know if he's guilty or not. What I do know is that there isn't a formal complaint. And I don't trust accusations from a biased media outlet like Escala's newspaper, namely eldiario.es. The moment a formal complaint is filed, which should be mandatory before a media outlet airs these accusations, they should at least have a complaint from the supposed victim. Because if not, anyone can say anything, like that woman who has no shame, who accused Adolfo Suarez 50 years later. Come on, don't mess with me. We can't cause this kind of gratuitous harm, because there are no guarantees of presumption of innocence of any kind. Julio Iglesias is being condemned in many Spanish media outlets, and I imagine that starting tomorrow in many media outlets around the world. For something we don't know if he did or didn't do. We know there is no complaint from the supposed victims, and we know that Julio hasn't said a word. They're crucifying him. Some bootlickers who support Sanchez are spreading it in every TV talk show they participate in. It's a way to create a smokescreen that diverts public debate from the shame of Sanchismo. The day there is a conviction, the day there is a complaint, and it is proven that Julio did that, I will be the first to despise him. But until then, I am not going to take part in the stoning of the most international artist we have, who proudly carries the Spanish flag around the world. And up until today, with this story or not, he was above reproach. That's as far as I can go.
We're going to the newsroom. Susana Gas, latest messages.
Greetings to everyone from the newsroom of Castellón Confidencial. Every day there are more of us, and every day we receive more messages and more opinions from our insiders who are already all around the world. Femi says that Pablo Iglesias, and this is a reminder, together with Bildu, voted in 2015. Let me remind you so that those prisoners of Maduro wouldn't be released. To this, Vera Lucia, who is also an insider and follows us every day, says, those who listen to their siren songs voted for them en masse. You are absolutely right. At that time, they were discontented young people. Luckily, now they have realized their mistake. LM says that every day we're becoming more open-minded thanks to programs like these. Thank you, Albert. Thanks to the panelists who truly give us a different opinion but also open our minds. Deborah says the worst offenders from those evil dictatorships and communist regimes deserve the highest justice. You may not notice, but there's also a hidden dictatorship here, and it's becoming more obvious. Grappa says that his doubt, and this is a question he asks us, is who is protecting Hugo Carvajal inside the prison so that the drug traffickers don't get to him before he spills the beans. He must have a privileged wing or a special prison. I also have to tell you, Albert, that several self-employed people have written to us and called us, worried about a headline that says the Supreme Court has upheld that self-employed people who have debts with Social Security will not receive a permanent disability pension, not even if they request a postponement. Well, don't worry, because we're going to take care of this issue soon. Our friend Jose Antonio also sent us a very illustrative photo on a wall where it says, they give away fear to sell us security and we pay for it with freedom, and we'll leave it at that. Albert, it's very important, dear friends of Castellón Confidential, that you follow us on all our channels, especially news channels. Castellón Confidencial. Confidencial es Castellón to stay well informed. And also our digital newspaper with all our articles and also all the news from Albert Castellón. It's castellonconfidential.com. Thank you very much, Albert.
Thank you very much. We'll catch Gran Cuartiaga and Diosdado Cabello, and we'll close this chapter. Andres, we're going to see it very soon. You'll see. Are you betting on outright elimination?
I bet on them being brought to justice and paying for their crimes, so that there is no impunity in Venezuela. It's not about retaliation or revenge, as some say. It's about restorative action, about the families of the tortured and murdered, seeing the executioners of their children behind bars. After a fair trial, where all their crimes have been exposed, that's what I want. Justice, like the vast majority of Venezuelans want, against this group of criminals who dedicated themselves to looting, destroying, and impoverishing our country.
And not like Granco, who last summer, Carlos, he was right there near you. He did the Camino de Santiago through your part of the country. A torturer and murderer, Maduro's butcher, banned from entering Europe. And there he was, showing off the Camino de Santiago on social media. What a shame.
We should see who invited him and who was with him, because this kind of person doesn't travel alone and has their contacts. Of course, it's a shame. Galicia doesn't deserve this. Thousands and thousands of Galicians emigrated to Venezuela back in the day. They were welcomed with open arms because they were people who went there to work, who worked their fingers to the bone, who made their small fortune, and who returned to Spain, leaving part of their heart behind. In that beloved land, many sons and grandsons of those immigrants feel proud of those people who today raise their voice, and they can raise it because someone has stepped forward, someone who understood that international law was just an excuse to protect a tyrant. That man's name is Donald Trump. He may have many flaws, but I hope he intervenes in Iran as well to stop innocent people from being killed in the streets for demanding freedom. It's an honor for me to share this program with Andres, and your answer, the one you just gave, does you credit. Seek justice, not revenge, because that's what sets us apart from murderous tyrants. They take you out, they finish you off, or they shoot you in the back of the head. You ask for justice, and the Spanish people, the honest Spanish people, those who truly care about you, those who risk nothing more than accompanying you in your suffering to reach the end of the road. Those people are proud of people like you, Andres. I send you a big hug, and it has been an honor to be with you in this discussion.
A big hug. I'm counting on you, Andres, and a huge hug. We continue in the fight until the liberation of Venezuela and of Spain too, Carlos. Help us.
Let me say one thing before.
I was already surprised that you said goodbye without saying, I want to add something. That's very much like you.
Since I know you'll fire me someday, at least now you'll have a reason. I want to send a big hug to the workers in the Spanish countryside, to our farmers who are being badly hurt by that agreement with Mercosur. They intend to bring in products to compete with ours, products that have no health guarantees, that come at low prices because they come from countries where workers have no rights, where products are used that poison Spaniards. And that's what our farmers have to fight against, while all kinds of obstacles are put in their way to produce and to sell. They can't compete on price because the level of requirements in Spain is extremely high. Those people from the countryside who represent the best of Spain, the ones who put food on our tables every day and have done so for so long, to those people, we send strength and encouragement. And someday this Mercosur thing will be a bad dream that we'll overcome sooner rather than later. We're with them.
Tomorrow we'll talk with farmers. Tomorrow we'll deal with Mercosur here on the program. A hug to both of you. Take care, my friends. Thank you. Carlos, Marcos, Andres Villavicencio. Well, a way out, a light at the end of the tunnel. If you have debts that are crushing you, today we have an exceptional testimony.
You are listening to Castillon Confidential.
You have no idea how much it energizes us that people who are having a hard time in Venezuela, in Caracas, or another city look to us as a source of information. Thank you so much to be. You know who you are. Thank you for this message.
We are immensely grateful, and I say this on behalf of many Venezuelans, that corruption has been exposed through those independent channels. They don't owe anything to any party or any government. Thank you for being the voice of so many Venezuelans.
You recharge our batteries with that message, really. Thank you so much for being there on the other end. Spread the word and help this channel keep growing just like it has been in the past few months. Well, and about Maduro's tracksuit? Yesterday we were talking about how the Mallorca soccer team in Spain, all the players wore the famous gray Nike tracksuit like Maduro's. And we said, not very funny. The panelists told me, well, maybe that wasn't the meaning Mallorca Football Club wanted to convey. J.M. Estrada clarifies it.
About Maduro's tracksuit, today it's actually the best-selling tracksuit in the world. If you lose your sense of humor, you lose everything, and irony has always been a sign of intelligence.
I'm with you. You're absolutely right. Another thing is, I assure you, you won't see me wearing that tracksuit, but that's fine. Yes, not losing your sense of humor is essential, absolutely. Well, moving on. There was a man named Viktor Frankl who was in several Nazi concentration camps. This man was an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and philosopher. Logotherapy, one of the forms of analysis, was created by him. Why am I telling you this? Because Ernesto left me a quote from that Frankel guy that I think is worth listening to.
Everything can be taken from a man except the last of the human freedoms, to choose his attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose his own way. We can't change the situation if it's not in our hands to change a situation that causes us pain. You can always choose the attitude with which you face that suffering. Viktor Frankl.
Thank you, Ernesto. I'm sure that quote has a lot to do with what Loren told us here, who spent 4 years in La Tumba, and he said, no. But I changed my mindset and even learned things, and I was somewhere else. I mean, the attitude being in a closed space, tortured day and night. And he learned, well, I learned much more interviewing him than what he told us. Well, we really enjoyed it. Thank you, Ernesto. And there are a lot of memes, for example, about Uriel Junqueras. Here's one where you can see him, in case it's not on YouTube, like a pirate taking the loot with the Spanish flag. Well, hundreds of years have passed and pirates still exist. Many of them govern, no more, no less. Well, and before I say thank you, there's a song by Maduro that I liked. It has a lot of feeling. It's made by artificial intelligence, and Pilar sent it to us. Imagine Maduro in the cell. Even if you're virtual, because I'm afraid there are deals and agreements here. Look, we'll see Maduro get out of jail before we leave this profession. You'll see. Maduro is a survivor. Not very smart, but a dangerous wild animal and capable of anything. And now he would betray his own mother for a few hours of freedom. Well, thank you very much, Maria de la Paz Peinado, for your donation. Beatriz Vasquez and Benito Garcia Navarro. Thank you so much, Benito. You're very kind. You help us keep the boat afloat. More tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you in the trenches. A hug to everyone.
Pero solo para mentes abiertas y para gente despierta. Desde la trinchera, las balas silban y no hay manera de salir allá afuera. Aquí la libertad tiene las alas de cera. Albert Castillo, Susana Gash, Tucci Castillo y demás. Muchas gracias.
Castillon Confidential by Albert Castillon.